always start off our housing justice forums with a quick run through our committees. There's a lot of committees that we have at Making Housing and Community Happen. And so we want to get an update from them. So first we'll start with Asha Anthony, who's our chairperson for Asha.
Hi there, everybody. Yes, that's the Affordable Supportive Housing Advocacy team. And we've been really busy this month trying to ensure that developers building in our city maximize the number of affordable inclusionary housing units on site. By law, developers in Pasadena must set aside 20% of their new developments as affordable, build off-site or pay a fee. We did research on a proposed development on Los Robles on property that's covered by the Fuller Seminary Master Plan, which requires 100% affordable student housing. This developer wants to change the plan so they can build 108 units, 100 are market rate, and the other 8 affordable. We want them to produce as much affordable student housing as possible, and that's what we're working on. The second project is a huge development on Los Robles, north of the freeway, that would produce 225 units of market rate housing in a predominantly Latinx low-income neighborhood. This development would replace a popular 99-cent store with deluxe apartments that no one in the neighborhood could afford. We spoke with the developer. He was very nice, he listened, and we urged him to build 45 units of affordable housing on site. And hopefully he will respond, in due time. We're going to keep pressuring him until he does. And finally, I have some really good news. I've just been listening to various proposals for affordable housing at the Civic Center, right next to City Hall. And we've been advocating for over a year for that site to be used for affordable housing. At first, the city wanted commercial development there, but now they want affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. And we heard 3 excellent proposals, and we're going to be mobilizing people to make sure that the city approves one of those proposals. And it'll be really a blessing for our city to have a church, a deluxe hotel, and affordable housing and permanent supportive housing all side by side next to City Hall. It'll be a real testimony to the values of our city, and we are so thrilled, and we're so grateful to God for the work that people have done to make this possible. So I'll tell you more when I do my presentation.
Thank you, Anthony. Next, Bert, who is the chairperson of the Church Liaison Committee. Go ahead, Bert.
Okay, so the goal of the Liaison Membership Network is to have an ongoing, trained, ethnically and economically diverse network of 60 liaison congregations to form housing justice teams by 2025. These teams will advocate to promote and pass just policies and approve affordable housing developments in Pasadena and the surrounding areas. Currently, we have 20 congregations in our congregational liaison network. That means that over 20 congregations have identified someone to be the official liaison for the work that we are doing. A liaison attends our monthly housing justice educational forums, brings others from their congregation, and rallies their congregation for specific campaigns to write emails and submit comments at city council meetings. Each member congregation also contributes a small annual donation to Making Housing and Community Happen. Liaisons can also organize educational events in their congregation. One church recently did this, resulting in 9 of their church members joining an advocacy Zoom call with a council member that same week. That church now has a strong team of advocates. So we encourage congregations to follow this model, even if you don't have a liaison yet. Through this network, we are deepening our roots in the community, and we are building the power we need to transform this city. Back to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Bert. Anne-Marie Molina is the chairperson of our ADU Accessory Dwelling Unit Committee. Take it away, Anne-Marie.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. The goal of the ADU subcommittee is to encourage building of at least 500 ADUs or granny flats in Pasadena by 2025, to drive down the cost for homeowners to design, build, and finance and rent ADUs that are affordable to the most vulnerable members of our community. In September, our team distributed flyers for Pasadena's ADU pilot program, and it was 115 degrees. And we specifically went to the homes on north and south of Zanja. It's a street ideal in Pasadena for ADUs. We met with the housing department, Randy Mapson and Bill Wong, who are on the housing staff and director of the housing department, to ask questions regarding the racial equity and the parameters for the financing of the ADU pilot program. Our questions were well received and considered. Our entire committee attended the orientations for the pilot, and the application window for the pilot program will be October 1st through the 30th. Currently, the permitting fees to build ADUs are quite high, and our team is still working on researching other cities to see what the fees associated with building are. One of the examples is we've been advised that solar panels are required for the ADUs to make sure that they are energy efficient. And we've been advised that the fees can be up to $8,000. We have not been able to get confirmation of one of the fees, how much it has actually cost. So we've been working with the ADU department and the permitting department to try to research that more. Finally, as ADU chair, the fires in our local mountains were of great concern, since the residents of the foothill areas were all advised to be ready to evacuate and to remain inside with our windows shut. This experience was stressful and difficult. The bad air was also shared by our homeless neighbors with no place to stay inside. So I just wanted to share that with you all, and that should re-energize all of our energy. I know it's been a tough week, but to remember that we are fighting for the good of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And next we'll have Connie Millsap from our Community Land Trust Subcommittee. Connie.
Hi, good evening. Our committee's goal is to create a community land trust for San Gabriel Valley. This was at the suggestion of Councilwoman Margaret McGostin. This model started over 50 years ago and by and for African Americans to foster economic rights by holding land in common. With the community land trust, homes are bought and sold, but not the land. That's the land trust part of it, making the homes therefore affordable. There are approximately 250 CLTs today across the United States. I've been attending a series of courses offered by Grounded Solutions, which is the National Technical Support Organization for CLTs. Our committee's first meeting was on September 12th. And we had fewer attendees than we hoped, but due to technical issues, we're all still managing, trying to get people connected on Zoom. Yet this gave us an opportunity to engage with Grant Power, who's with Habitat for Humanity. And he shared how County Supervisor Hilda Solias in District 1 is encouraging CLTs, which has energized peer learning groups, which we're going to try to connect to. Grant shared about the activity of CLTs in the LA area and has been engaging with this network. And we also discussed a possible fiscal sponsorship with Habitat for Humanity. Anyone who's on the meeting tonight, if you're interested in the work of Community Land Trust, I will post my email in the chat. Our next meeting is this Saturday on September 26th from 2:30 to 4 via Zoom. So if you're interested, give me an email request and I will send you the link so you can participate. Look forward to this group moving forward in our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. This is our committee, our newest one, I think, and just getting off the ground. And I know Connie's been going to a lot of training and getting people together, and this is really exciting. Thank you, Connie. How about Dr. Gilbert Walton? He is going to tell us about the North Fair Oaks Improvement Group. Dr. Walton, can you tell us what you've been up to with your group?
Hello, yes, very exciting. The goal of the North Fair Oaks Empowerment Initiative is to transform North Fair Oaks between Washington and Woodbury, and to do that with and by the community. So our priorities are affordable housing, employment, and safe and beautiful streets. So the exciting thing is we received a grant of $20,000, and with that decided to hire an organizer. And we had a superbly qualified applicant by the name of Gary Moody, who has a long history of community organizing and social involvement. And so we had a meeting last night with myself, Jill, DeWalt Brown, Joyce Graham, Joyce Hill, Elder Boyd, Tina Wilkes Wilson, and Pastor John Stewart. We were impressed in that interview and decided unanimously to hire him. He's eager to get started, and this is more than a job for him. I think this is a continuation of many of the things that he feels is a calling on his life. And so our first goal is to get the overlay zones done as much and as quickly as possible, given the time constraints associated with that. So very critical time for us and very excited.
Thank you, Dr. Walton. And for people who don't know about the church overlay zone, there are churches that are very, very interested in developing housing right on their property. And this is something that Jill and Anthony and all of Making Housing and Community Happen are really trying to get through, so we can get a lot more affordable housing for our community. Tom Petersmeyer for the Safe Parking Committee, you want to go ahead?
Yes, the goal of the Safe Parking Committee is to set up the first program in the San Gabriel Valley, where there is none at this time, and set up more in the future. What we do is homeless people who live in their vehicle usually have no place to park safely. There are a number in the county of safe parking sites where they can go safely with security, etc. We have discovered a problem with the city of Pasadena, which does not allow safe parking at this time. We've also identified a number of almost 20 churches in Pasadena that are interested in having a safe parking lot on their property. We're working on details with one of the churches, Trinity Lutheran. They like to go ahead with a program. We've also started writing grants. We're talking $150,000 a year budget for this type of program. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. And our last but not least subcommittee is the Congregational Land Committee. And Jill's going to give the report, followed by her executive director report.
Hi, everybody. I'm just thrilled to see what's happening in the Church Land Committee. It's the goal of that committee is really to create a path for churches to be able to have affordable housing on excess land that they may have. So churches, actually, it's a perfect marriage between churches. Churches today are losing a lot of members, and this is a way to try to keep people in the community. We actually have 26 churches right now that are in the pipeline, and 7 of those in Pasadena. We have one church on North Fair Oaks that already has a proposal ready for 43 units. And so now we're looking for a development partner. So if anyone on this call today is an affordable housing developer and they're interested in seeing that proposal and maybe taking a bid, I know the church would love to have an interview with you. Our powerful team, it's made up of Phil Burns, who leads the Arroyo Group that planned Pasadena's Old Town Civic Center and Playhouse District. They've won lots of awards. Andre White, who's Harvard trained, developer, affordable housing developer. Hugh Martinez, who's like a walking encyclopedia of affordable housing. Cynthia Kurtz, who was our city manager. And John O, Reverend John O, who's working throughout the county with churches interested in this. And then Tricia Keene. She's our newest member, amazing, ran for city council and was on our our planning commission. So we're really blessed to have her. So we have an interesting discussion. We've decided, because of some of the funding that we got, a sizable grant for $100,000 to do this work, they required that we have some aspect of discussion around racism. So every week we take a different part of housing justice or housing injustice and talk about that in terms of racism. So it's been really rich, our discussions. We've met, right now we're really gearing up, as Sonia has mentioned, as well as Dr. Gilbert Walton, about the overlay zone. It's an urgent issue that would save probably $100,000 per development, and it would save up to a year in the time that it gets built. So it would be a huge boon to try to reach the city's RHNA numbers. That's the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and the requirement to plan for enough housing for all income levels in our city. That's a requirement for every city in California. So, so we're gearing up for that. And one way we're helping to make that happen is by offering every Saturday at 10 o'clock a Zoom meeting where anyone that wants to can join and learn about what the overlay zone is. So I invite you to join us this Saturday. If you're interested, I'll make sure that I give you the Zoom link. I'll try to get that in chat for you. So now I just want to do a little bit of my role is kind of this. I don't think of myself as an executive director, but I feel like I'm just a servant to all the amazing volunteers and folks that God has brought our way. But I just see the dedication and the passion, and it just makes me so happy of everyone that's part of our team. When I've done one-day housing justice institutes around the country, I've often provided a biblical basis for advocacy, and certainly Alexia started off with some of that, but I just want to summarize a few thoughts before our speakers jump on. It's really interesting because the Holy Spirit is actually considered an advocate, a comforter, and we certainly all need comfort, especially in these days. We all need an advocate. So the root idea is to be with and to support. And we all need that kind of, we need people with us and we need support. And I think we practice advocacy every day, whether you've ever been involved in housing or any kind of work with the city council. Every one of us in one way or another are an advocate. Maybe it's for our pet, maybe it's for the kids, who knows? There's all kinds of ways that we demonstrate that we are with and supporting. The kind of advocacy we're talking about tonight is more of a public type of advocacy, and we see that throughout Scripture. So starting with Moses, who was called by God as an advocate for his people who were being used as slaves, labor slaves. And then Esther. It's very interesting. I just love the story of Esther. She risked her life to speak to the king on behalf of an edict that was destroying her people. So she saved her whole nation. And that was through amazing things like, you know, winning a beauty contest. You never know how God might use things that you would never think of as an asset, through prayer, through fasting, and through a connection to Mordecai, you know, who was her relative, who was kind of the insider and would feed her important information. So at the center of every single message that the prophets gave was the poor and needy. In my courses, in getting my degree at Bible college, I remember they were talking so much about all the literary beauty of the prophets. And I was thinking, but the purpose, you know, the goal really at the very center is the poor and needy. And even the same with Jesus. Every single parable, Jesus brought the outsider to the inside. And that's really what we're doing as an organization. We have that privilege. So we are committed to housing everyone adequately, and especially the most vulnerable. And this process is not only creating housing, and we've seen thousands of units created through our advocacy efforts for the last 25 years, but it's also creating community. And that's a beautiful thing, creating the beloved community. So I thank God for the amazing speakers tonight, and especially this man right here sitting next to me, who's my husband, and Alexia. I've had the privilege of co-teaching with her at Azusa Pacific, and I consider a longtime treasured friend. So thank you for listening to my ED report.
Thank you, Jill. Before we start with our first presenter, we have a wonderful housing story. Making Housing and Community Happen is putting together videos of housing stories. And this is the first one we're showing, first one tonight. Morgan Tucker is going to, she is one of staff for Making Housing and Community Happen, and she's been putting these together, and she'll take it from here. Go ahead, Morgan.
Can you capture the link that's on our Zoom and put it in chat this Saturday at 10? Because I don't have a way to send it to you very well. It'd be easier and quicker if you just go directly to Zoom. Can you do that?
Hello, my name is Morgan Tucker, and I work for Making Housing and Community Happen. MHCH is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and empowering congregations for housing justice. I'm so pleased to introduce Cynthia Kirby to you today. Cynthia is a valued member of the MHCH community, and she serves on Union Station's Lived Experience Advisory Panel. Cynthia is here to share her inspiring story with us today.
My name is Cynthia Kirby. I'm 49 years old, a wife, and a mother to an amazingly strong 19-year-old daughter. I was placed on permanent disability at age 28 and went from making $60,000 a year to less than $1,000 per month. The strain of my disability ended my first marriage. My parents provided some support until I wound up in an abusive relationship that brought with it criminal elements and crystal meth. I spent the next decade in and out of homelessness, struggling with my addiction and domestic violence. I slept in my car, stayed in abandoned houses, or moved from motel to motel. The night I turned 40, I spent in a grocery store parking lot, afraid to fall asleep. I had just met my current husband, relapsed after 8 years in recovery. I'd also been in recovery, but I had struggled with the program's spiritual emphasis. I was curious about how he'd come to believe, and he shared the word of God with me. But life seemed hopeless, so I leveled an ultimatum at whatever higher power might exist. It had 1 year to convince me to continue living. In that year, even though my mom died, my husband was incarcerated, and I waited for him desperately alone on the streets of Pasadena, God wooed me, building the foundation of my relationship with him. At the 1 year mark, my husband was released from jail, and I took it as a sign that God listened. We wanted to get married and find housing, but we had few options on disability income. God used connections we had made on the street and in recovery to help us achieve stability. My husband was accepted into Union Station Homeless Services Adult Center. 3 months later, we were married, and I was invited into the program. We received a housing voucher, which included permanent supportive services, people helping us to rebuild our lives, though it took nearly a year to find an apartment because of the affordable housing crisis. Today, I'm a member of Union Station's Lived Experience Advisory Panel, work part-time at my church, First Baptist Church, Pasadena, and am the director of our children's choir. I have more than 8 years of sobriety. I'm a student at PCC and have nearly a 4.0 GPA. Gratitude for a life I never thought I would have, and my amazingly intimate relationship with God carry me. When I heard about Jill Shook and her work in Pasadena, I attended a housing justice workshop, became a member of Making Housing and Community Happen, and served as their liaison with my church. It has been a blessing to advocate for permanent housing solutions, to be a part of direct democracy, to realize that my voice is powerful. Working with Jill, I've been to city council meetings, had one-on-one meetings with council members, spoken with the mayor, and who am I? Can I do this? I'm a citizen and a community member, and my voice matters. The advocacy, prayer vigils, and sleep outs by Heritage Square led to its approval, and now it's being built. The work they do works. Everyone should support the pioneering work of Making Housing and Community Happen to equip faith communities to be the church, be the hands that feed. Please join us in building a better community.
Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing your powerful story. We at MHCH would like to invite you to support our housing justice work. To do so, go to our website at makinghousinghappen.org/donate. All right, hey everybody. I hope you all can hear me. Okay. My name is Morgan, and like I said in the video, I work for MHCH. I just want to briefly remind everyone here about our website, makinghousinghappen.org. I'm going to do a quick share screen to show you all. Bear with me for a moment. I'm just gonna up my screen. A little bit of technical difficulty here. And full screen that. Okay, so if you go to our homepage and you select local advocacy and you select MHCH local advocacy, there you will find information about our monthly housing forum, which is what you're all at right now. Go ahead and scroll down to past meetings, where you'll find materials from previous forums, including videos, notes, subcommittee updates, and any past presentations or PowerPoints that are associated with the meeting. If you scroll up to tonight's meeting, you will find the subcommittee updates that you just heard have already been uploaded, so you can download those at your convenience. And then finally, I'd like to direct you to our donate page, which is you could find in the top right corner here. You click that link and you will see an option to donate online, or there's also an option and directions on how to mail checks. So yeah, go ahead and explore our website at your convenience. It's a wonderful educational resource, and you'll get a lot of great information there. So thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Great presentation and great housing story. I love that video. Looking forward to seeing several more, because I know they're being produced right now. Okay, now for our educational program, we are very pleased to have the Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra with us tonight. She's the author with Dr. Peter Heltzel of Faith-Rooted Organizing, Mobilizing the Church in Service to the World, and the founder of the Faith-Rooted Organizing Network. She is a Lutheran pastor with over 40 years of experience in community ministry, including church-based service and community development programs, congregational and community organizing, and legislative advocacy. She's been a national leader in the areas of working poverty and immigration for over 20 years. Alexia received her doctoral degree in intercultural studies from Fuller Seminary and currently serves as assistant professor of integral mission and global transformation at Fuller. Reverend Alexia is going to talk to us about faith-rooted advocacy and organizing, what it is, how it works, including what is serpent power and dove power, and why it's important to have both. She'll also share faith-rooted advocacy and organizing strategies and examples. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra.
Thank you, Sonia. So I was sent a series of questions and I realized that I actually don't have time to answer all of these, but I'm going to do my best. I'll answer them quickly. I actually was asked by Anthony and Sonia to start by talking a little bit about why the intersection of faith and justice on a personal level. And I want to say that I've heard the word justice defined as just us. And I like that a lot because that means that there's no us and them. It means there's just us. And that means that what I want for my children, I want for our children, all of our children, because we are all connected. And injustice is the experience of unfair limitations, of some people not being able to have the same access to abundant life that other people do. When I was working with urban poor squatters in the Philippines, they talked about injustice as in relationship to a stunted plant, a little plant that didn't have the sunlight or the air or the room to grow that it would need to grow to its full size. And I was raised, I think anybody who's raised with the experience of unfair limitations, knows that that's not what we're supposed to experience, that that's not what we're meant for. You know it in your bones. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily have empathy with everyone who has this experience. I have a sister who grew up the same way I do, is concerned about herself getting out of it, not about anybody else. And I have to say that even though I felt empathy, that I didn't come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior. I was not a religious person at all growing up. I don't come from a religious family. And it wasn't until I had that experience and that spiritual shift in my life that I had the hope that justice would be possible. That I would not have worked for justice for all, because I thought that injustice was more powerful when I looked at the world. And it wasn't until I saw a God who empathized with our suffering to the degree of being on the cross. And then I heard the story of sacrificial love turning into power in the promise of the resurrection, that I began to believe that justice is possible. And that's what really made me an activist for justice. The only other thing I'd want to say is that there's a concept in Christianity of stewardship, which means you use every gift you've been given for God's purposes. And I think that when we talk about our political role, that's because, thank God, we live in a place where we actually do have a voice. It's not perfect, but we do have a voice in the process of public decision making. And if you've got, whatever you've got, if you've got a voice, then you have to use it. So that's a real quickie. Now I want to say something about faith-rooted organizing. Organizing is bringing people together to change the system. It's to make the kind of change that you can't make by yourself. So faith-based organizing means that you involve faith communities in that process. But you can involve faith communities in that process and still have a secular model in terms of your core assumptions about reality. How do you understand power? How do you understand human motivation? The answers to those questions can come from a secular place, or they can come from a faithful place. You can go deep into the well of your faith and you will find a whole variety of gifts to bring to the larger movement for justice. So faith-rooted organizing is about going deep into that well. It's about examining our assumption. It's about organizing as if God is real. So let me talk a little bit about what that means. I want to talk about what it means to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. That's something that Jesus said. It was the best, some of his organizing instructions. And I think to be wise as serpents is to take absolutely seriously the carnal and sinful aspects of human beings. Sometimes human beings only care about their narrow self-interest. That's true. Sometimes they go for power at any cost. That's true. And to be wise as a serpent is to recognize that truth and act accordingly. But to be only wise as a serpent is to reduce people to their carnal and sinful selves. And people are way more than that. The Holy Spirit is alive and well and moving through the world and working on everyone. And anyone can be suddenly capable of amazing acts of sacrificial love and moral courage, even politicians. To be innocent as a dove is to understand how to evoke the best in people, not only how to deal with the worst in people. So I want to take a little time to just go over what serpent power and dove power are like, because what I want to encourage you to do is to use them both and to use them well. So there's a story that Jesus tells, and I'm going to go through it really quickly. It's a great story about what it means to be a faithful serpent. So Jesus said, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor regarded man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, "Vindicate me against my adversary." For a while he refused, but afterwards he said to himself, "Although I neither fear God nor regard man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will vindicate her, or she will wear me out by her continual coming." And the Lord said, "Hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God vindicate his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will vindicate them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" If you're a widow, you probably don't have a lot of power anywhere in the world. And if you're a widow and you've been treated unjustly, and you know that the only person who can give you justice is a jerk, what do you usually do? Nothing. You stay home, because what is there to do? You're not going to waste your energy. Is that true of a lot of people in our world? They've experienced injustice, but they're just staying home because they really don't believe anything can be done about it. But Jesus uses this woman as an example of faith, because she believes so deeply in the God of justice that even though this guy is a jerk, she keeps going and demanding justice over and over and over again. Is she right? Does she get justice? So, but the reason why this is not a miracle story, this is not a dove story, is because Jesus makes sure that we know that this guy hasn't changed, right? He says to himself at the end, "Although I don't fear God or regard people," right? So we know he hasn't changed. Why does he do justice? Well, because she annoys him. She bothers him. She makes the pain of not changing greater than the pain of changing. She exercises a critical mass of pressure. And that's serpent power. And that's often what you do in organizing and advocacy, right? But that's not, and I don't have time to go through all the details. I was going to give you some questions. I can send this to you later, but there's a set of questions you can ask yourself to see whether you're using serpent power as well as possible. But because our time is short, I'm going to make sure that y'all understand dove power, because everyone uses serpent power who does advocacy, but not everyone uses dove power. So I just want to hold this up right now. This is a little comparison. Saul Alinsky is the father of organizing in the United States, or that's how he's spoken of. And he was a great serpent power organizer, but he didn't know anything about dove power. Gandhi, on the other hand, knew a lot about dove power. So this is what Alinsky said about our opponents. He said, the 13th rule, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. In other words, he's saying, make the person into as much of a jerk as possible so you can get maximum pressure against them. Gandhi, on the other hand, said, nonviolent resistance is not for cowards. It's not a quiet, passive acceptance of evil. One is passive and nonviolent physically, but very active spiritually, always seeking ways to persuade the opponent of advantages in the way of love, cooperation, and peace. The goal is not to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but rather to win him or her over to understanding new ways to create cooperation and community. That's dove power. So let me give you a couple broader examples of dove power. And then let me actually go to some daily examples because of our time is so short. So Bishop Desmond Tutu, Black South African bishop, one of the great nonviolent warriors in the struggle against the evil system of apartheid. During apartheid, one Easter morning, there were soldiers who came into the church, into the cathedral, and they rounded the inside of the cathedral with rifles. How do you think the people felt? They were terrified, right? They thought that he might preach against apartheid, which he did regularly, and that they would shoot him and that other people would get shot as well. That had happened to Archbishop Romero in El Salvador. It was not unexpected. But they were also scared that he wouldn't speak, because if he didn't speak, then the regime had won, if he was intimidated. So Bishop Tutu starts bouncing up and down on his feet, and he starts laughing uproariously, laughing like a child. What happens when someone starts laughing like that? Everyone starts laughing, right? The whole place is laughing, even the soldiers. And in the middle of the laughter, he calls out to the soldiers and he says, little brothers, you know our God is the God of the Exodus, a God of justice. You know we're going to win. We don't want a single one of you to miss a moment of the celebration, because the party wouldn't be complete without you. Join us now. He goes on to preach fiercely against apartheid, and he doesn't get shot. Why? Why didn't they pull the trigger? There was a different kind of power in that room. What was that power? We call it dove power, the power of the dove, the spirit. But he looked right past, how did it function? He looked right past those rifles and he saw those boys and he loved them. And they knew it. And they also had to wonder, he was so sure. They had to wonder if he might be right. If they didn't want to be on the wrong side of history. Faith, that's called faith, that's called hope. Faith, hope, and love. We think of them as spiritual powers, but they are real world powers. They are dove power. So when you go in to advocate, carry your dove power. Now, I want to say that when people who are marginalized and oppressed scream, it's because they're certain that they can't be heard. If you know that you have that kind of power dwelling in you, you don't have to scream, because you know that your voice will be heard. My mother's voice was most powerful when it got quiet. Right? Many of us have had that experience, right? It's a visceral power. That's what they had in the sit-ins in Nashville. They had that kind of visceral power. That's nonviolent power. That's dove power. So I was going to give you some more training, but instead I'm going to give you some stories, because I think stories really speak. And then we can come back and do the principles under the stories. But they did ask me, Anthony and Sonia did ask me for a scripture, because part of that power is in the word itself. There is a power in the poetry of the word. Don't just translate it into secular terms. Use it, it sings. When Martin Luther King Jr. got up to talk about his dream, he used Isaiah. He wasn't frightened to do that. So they asked me what scripture I liked for housing, and I liked this one. It was George Washington, the first president of the United States. It was his favorite scripture. He said it about 200 times. Micah 4:4, everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. For the Lord Almighty has spoken. Those words have power. So I'm going to give you a few stories. We were trying to pass a living wage policy in San Diego, which is a very conservative city. We had a good broad coalition. We had a lot of serpent power going, but we had 40% of the city council with us and 60% against us. We needed one more person to be with us, but they had been invested in heavily to vote against us, our opponents. They had been given a lot of money. So we were going every week, like the widow, to the city council meeting, every week. But that 60% weren't listening to us. They had walls up. So we were part of a coalition that was both secular and faithful. And those of us who were the faith folks decided that it was time to stop talking and start praying. So when we went up to the microphone, we took the microphone and we prayed. Some of us prayed for people who were working poor and needed a living wage. Some of us prayed for the shalom of the city. Some of us prayed for city council members. So we've been doing that for a few weeks, and one of those conservative opponents who had been invested in suddenly voted with us and we won. And a journalist interviewed him afterwards and said, why did you vote for the living wage? And he said, I couldn't take being prayed for one more week. You see, he had armor against the talking points, but he had no armor against the prayer. He was a real believer. So he had to face his God, and it changed him. Now, do you think it was frightening for him to do that? Absolutely, it was terrifying. He could lose his job. But we don't live by fear as people of faith. And the act of encouragement and the art of encouragement is literally to give courage, to remind someone of what they believe most deeply and who they love, so they will have the courage to do what they believe is right. That's part of Dove Power, is to exercise that, to be chaplains on the field of the battle for justice. If we don't do that as people of faith, no one else will. Let's see, I probably have time. Actually, it's 8:55. I don't have time for other stories, but I will tell you other stories if you want. I have hundreds of them. So
Yes, Dr. Lexi, if you could definitely give.
You want me to tell you a couple more stories?
Great.
Okay.
Yes, we'd love it.
Okay, so let's see which one I'll do. So this is a fun one. So in Central Washington, we had a congressional representative who was completely anti-immigrant. He was Republican, he was conservative, he was anti-immigrant. But there was a farm worker association, and they were using serpent power. And we had started the Evangelical Immigration Table. So we had a number of pastors that we had organized who were beginning to really care about the issue. So we held a prayer breakfast with the pastors, and one of the representatives of the Farm Worker Association came. And the congressperson didn't come, but his chief of staff. A chief of staff is like a spouse, you know, they've been hanging out together for many years, right? They're very close. So he came, and he was a conservative evangelical also. So at the beginning of as a reflection, I talked about dove power and serpent power. I just felt like I wanted to do that as a prayer reflection at the beginning of the meeting. So during the whole meeting, this guy is sitting here with his arms folded. He's like not even there. He's just trying to get out, right? And, but also the woman from the Farm Worker Association is in the same thing. She just is going to make an announcement about an action, and then she's going to leave. But she stands up to make her announcement at the end, and suddenly she stops, and she has tears rolling down her eyes. And she said, you know, the word that the pastor, me, gave at the beginning has been eating at me this whole time. Because she said, you know, we know each other, Adam, she used his first name. She said, we know each other. We don't really know each other, but you've seen me screaming outside your office a number of times. And he started laughing, and she started laughing. And she said, but you know, tonight, and the tears were rolling, she said, I realized that you're my brother in Christ. And I've never taken that seriously. I've never believed that you could care about us. She said, so I'm gonna stand on faith, and I'm gonna ask you to care about us. Will you listen? And he was shocked. He unfolded his arm and he said, sure, sister, of course, I'll listen. And so she started telling the stories of the immigrant, the dreamers, the stories of the families that had been separated. And he really listened. And he said, you know, I gotta tell you, I don't know anything about this issue. I've never studied it at all. I've never cared about it. But I promise you, I will look into it, and I will talk to the congressman about it. So a little late, like about a week later, one of our pastors from the Evangelical Covenant Church is at some kind of Kiwanis dinner, and he ends up sitting next to the congressman. And the congressman turns to him and says, my staff person had this strange experience, and his attitude on immigration changed. What do you think about immigration? So they end up having this really long conversation. So long and short of it is that he ends up changing his position completely. He ends up one of the strongest advocates in Congress, Republican advocates for immigration reform. That's dove power. So that's just, I mean, I could give a lot more. I could give hundreds, like I said, but I just wanted to give you a couple. I do want to say that symbols are really powerful. I will say that. We were working on nursing homes, and we decided to give legislators little teeny bonsai trees, you know, those little trees. And we put a picture on the trunk of the legislator's grandparents, if we could find it. And then we put the legislator on his picture on one of the little branches. And we wrote the scripture on the little trees at the bottom, made a little plaque that said, honor your fathers and mothers so you'll have long life in the land. And then we came in to talk about nursing homes and we gave that as a gift. You know, but they looked at it like it was going to bite them, but it definitely, symbols have an effect. Throughout the scripture, prophets use symbols. Jesus washed feet. He didn't just tell people to serve each other. He washed feet because symbols have enormous power. We don't use symbols, and our faith traditions are full of symbols. So I want to urge you not only to take the movement of the Spirit seriously, but to use the rich color of song and symbol and ritual as you do your work. So now I'm 5 minutes over.
Oh, that's okay. We now are going to have some questions. I know Bert has been monitoring the chat. If anybody has any questions for Reverend Dr. Alexia, please put them in the chat box now. And while we're waiting, I do have a question, Dr. Salvatierra, and that is, when do you know which one to use?
That's a really good question. And I want to say that it's really discernment, because it can be the least likely person. Some of our stories, well, you heard the story from San Diego, that was the least likely person, right? So sometimes it's a swing person, and you can tell it's a swing person. You know about that person's faith. That's the person you're going to focus on because you already know that they're a believer, right? But sometimes it's the least likely person that's moved. One of the techniques that we tend to do in faith-rooted organizing is often people don't get involved because they don't see themselves as activists. They see themselves as spiritual contemplatives or prayer warriors. Well, we ask those people to come to legislative meetings and to just be silent and pray. Like we're saying, we're not asking you to talk. We're not asking you to advocate. We just want you to be in the room quietly praying inside your own head. Those meetings, they go a lot better because we discern accurately. There's a spirit in the room. That's what I mean by organizing as if God is real. Like, take it seriously. But you also just have to experiment. You're free in the grace of God to experiment. You use a little serpent power, you use a little dove power, you see what works, right?
We do have a question, and it is, have you written a book on serpent and dove stories?
Yes, it doesn't have the recent ones. It was written in 2014. It's called Faith-Rooted Organizing. And it's a book not only of stories, it's a book of both stories and principles, which I do training. You don't do training in 20 minutes. But, there's certainly a number of strategies, tactics, principles that you learn to be able to do this effectively. And people are doing it all over the world and exchanging these with each other. So it's a movement. It's not just something that I invented. I just my friend Peter and I wrote a book about it at a particular point in history, a snapshot of it. But
Dr. Alexia, do you use both? I know you've talked a lot about power, but how do you know when serpent power would be what the right one to use? Or do you use a combination?
Use a combination. But I really see that you have to watch out with serpent power because you're going to offend the person. You're going to make them angry when you apply a critical mass of pressure. And if you make them, it's all right to make somebody angry. It's not the end of the world. Some of the people who have made us angry, later we respect them, right? But if you make them too angry, if they feel like your attack has become personal and vicious, like when Alinsky talks about freeze the target, polarize it, what happens is you never can turn your back on that person again because they're out for revenge. They're no longer out for outcome, they're out for revenge. So, you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of the cost of serpent power. That there's times that you have to use it, but don't just use it wantonly without thinking about it, because that's a human being on the other end of you, right? They may be a human being with a hard heart, And then you got to soften it up with some pressure, just like you do when your child's having a tantrum, right? Got to soften it up with a little pressure there. But remember that that's a human being. And so don't use it judiciously.
Bert, any more questions in the chat?
Sorry, I was having trouble with my own mic there. Somebody wanted
Just say something. Maybe she could stop. Maybe Lexi could stop the share so we can see your.
Oh yeah.
See you again. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
We had somebody ask if you would be willing to share your slides. So I don't know if that's.
Oh yeah, of course. Because I didn't was not able to go through a lot of them. I don't know how intelligible they'll be. Like I have questions there to ask yourselves for Serpent and Dove Power before you go to do a visit, for example. So I'm happy to send them to you if you would find them useful, but they may not be very clear without a training. But yeah, sure, of course. I already sent it to Anthony, so he's welcome to, he can send it out.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Salvatierra, and you've given us a lot of food for thought, and I know me personally, and I'm sure a lot of other people would like to know more about this serpent-dove distinction and be able to use both effectively. So thank you so much for sharing that.
So I want to tell you that that you do amazing work, and that I have a crazy life, so I can't actually participate directly in it, but I am thankful as a resident of Pasadena for all the work that you do, and may God bless it. Somebody asked about trainings. Because I'm full-time at Fuller, I'm not setting up trainings. If people set them up for me, if somebody wants me to come train, I will do it for whatever people want to pay me. I don't have a set fee. But I don't run around looking for opportunities because I run an organization. I run an organization and I teach full time. So, and I write. I have to write. So but everybody, Anthony and Sonia and Jill will have my information. If anybody wants to reach me, they can. But I actually am going to go because I actually have some work to do.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge and sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Goodbye. Next we have Dr. Anthony Musis. He's a Quaker peace activist, a retired college professor, and co-founder of Making Housing and Community Happen, along with his wife, Dr. Jill Shook, whose book, Making Housing Happen, Faith-Based Affordable Housing Models, he helped to edit. He currently chairs Making Housing and Community Happen's Affordable Supportive Housing Advocates, ASHA group, and successfully led a campaign to convince the Pasadena City Council to approve 69 units of permanent supportive housing for seniors at Heritage Square South. Anthony serves on the board of a national Quaker lobby called Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL.org, and organizes lobby visits both locally and in Washington, D.C. He's authored and edited 7 books, and his many articles have appeared in Quaker and professional journals. He blogs about peace, justice, and spirituality at laquaker.blogspot.com. Anthony's going to give us some practical steps to follow in our role as advocates and show us how easy it is and why it's so critical to advocate for affordable and supportive housing in our local jurisdiction and beyond. Thank you, Anthony. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And I'm feeling very honored and privileged to follow Alexia, who's been an inspiration to me, and her book, Faith-Rooted Organizing, has been like a Bible that I followed very carefully, and it actually works. So I'm going to share my experiences as a housing justice advocate and some things that I've learned that hopefully you can apply and make work. So I'm going to get this PowerPoint up. Okay, there we go. All right, so So the first thing I want to do is just celebrate a birthday. Today is the birthday of Reverend James Lawson, who was Dr. King's mentor and colleague. And today was declared Reverend James Lawson Day by the LA County Board of Supervisors. And I'm mentioning him because he spoke recently at the memorial for Congressman John Lewis. And he said that Lewis and the civil rights movement was not just about civil rights, it was also about economic justice and housing justice. And he said some words that stuck to me. We would not be in the struggle we are today in housing if President Reagan hadn't cut billions of dollars for housing where local churches and local nonprofits could build affordable housing in their own communities, being sustained and financed by loans from the federal government. So Dr. King, Reverend Lawson, and John Lewis were all advocates. And they also advocated for affordable housing. And they did that because affordable housing never gets built without advocacy. There's no law requiring affordable housing to be built. In fact, there's a state Article 34 requires that affordable housing must go through a public process to be approved. So advocates are absolutely essential if we want to have affordable housing. And the first step is actually the fun part. It's to build a team. And advocacy is all about building trust and relationships, and that's why teams are so important. As the saying goes, we're better together. People on a team bring different gifts and help and support each other. And Jesus had a team of 12 that grew into a powerful movement. I feel really blessed that I'm facilitating one of MHCH teams. Ours focuses on affordable and supportive housing, and it's a joy to know and work with amazing and dedicated people like Bert and Sonia and Arita and Sean and Rick and Amara, Fern and Teresa, and many more who've become friends over the past several years. I love how we support and appreciate each other. We also partner with wonderful organizations like Union Station and Everyone In. And it feels as if we're part of a beloved community. And that's what sustains us, especially now that we're going through this lockdown with COVID. These friendships and relationships are so important. So the second thing we do is prioritize. We decide on whether or not it's time to launch a campaign and how we want to proceed. Is the timing right? Is the cause winnable? What are our first steps? Is it something that's come up on a city council agenda? For example, a couple of years ago, the city councilman proposed a city-owned site for affordable housing. That was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. Or is it something we feel is important that needs to be agendized? For example, we're urging the city to let churches build affordable housing on their land. This isn't on the agenda yet, but we're meeting with elected officials and hopefully it will be put on the agenda soon. Our process is research, action, and reflection. We spend time researching the need, the facts, how this policy was implemented in other places, and also where the decision makers stand. We create talking points that can help our team of advocates stay on message. Research leads to action, and then reflection on what works and what needs improvement. We make all of our decisions by consensus. All decisions and talking points are agreed upon by everyone. And that's how you build a strong team. And we find a precedent for that in Acts 15. The Council of Jerusalem came together and they decided unanimously on issues of church governance and theology and outreach. So for every campaign, we develop these talking points, arguments that we all agree upon and use when we meet with or write to elected officials. Here's a listing of some that we had for the Heritage Square. We had about a dozen talking points, and people would take one and personalize it, put it in their own language. But it's important that we stay on message when we advocate as a team or as part of a campaign. We meet one-on-one with elected officials, commissioners, or anyone who's a decision maker to find out what interests them, where they stand. And then we try to secure their support. For example, in this picture, there's the mayor with a group of us, and we talked to him about the accessory dwelling units and the excessive fee that was being charged, $20,000. And we convinced him that that fee was too much, especially if someone was building an ADU for a family member. And it's changed his mind. So one-on-ones are really important. That's where we can really make a difference. The other way we make a difference is by bringing crowds to public meetings and doing media campaigns, bringing pastors, church members, the stories of the poor and middle class that need to be told. And their stories are part of the redemptive story of our city. And of course, eternal vigilance is the price of justice. We never give up, and we never take it for granted. It's an ongoing struggle. In fact, Dr. King called it a beautiful struggle. And we see that we have an obligation to do what we do. It's a joy, as I said before, but it's also something that we're commanded to do. In Proverbs, it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." This sentiment is expressed throughout the Gospels and throughout the Bible. But it's not enough. There's also a necessity to listen to the marginalized. We heard a wonderful testimony today by Cynthia Kirby, and her story reminds me of the unjust judge and the widow that Alexia told us about. When Cynthia tells her story, people listen because it comes from her lived experience, and she's a very important part of our team. So let me tell you my story. I became involved with housing justice advocacy only a few years ago. It started in January of 2018 when Council Member John Kennedy raised the issue of using some vacant city-owned land at Heritage Square South for affordable housing. This was a bold move since Heritage Square North project housing low-income seniors was very contentious. Took many years of advocacy and several failed attempts before this project came to fruition. And you can see it up above. It's a beautiful housing for low-income seniors, but it took a lot of work to make it happen. Kennedy asked the housing department to make a recommendation about this site, and they recommended housing homeless seniors because of the huge need. Kennedy held a community meeting in February, did a survey, and 80% were supportive of affordable housing on this site. We felt this cause was winnable because the city council member supported it and the community wanted it. But we knew it wouldn't be easy. So we started holding prayer vigils on the site and began to hold public meetings. Using consensus decision-making, we built a committed team, solicited letters from churches, met with neighbors and businesses to obtain signatures for a petition. Partnering with the tenants union, we gathered over 1,000 letters and contact information for people to invite to city council. And we found that prayer was an essential part of our faith-rooted advocacy. However, we're open to people of all faiths and also to people of conscience who do not practice a particular religion. To get public attention, we slept overnight with our homeless neighbors, which was an eye-opening and heart-opening experience. I was very moved in the middle of the night when some of my homeless neighbors turned out to be African-American women sleeping at church's chicken. And I found out that they didn't have a mat and a sleeping bag like I did. They were just sleeping on the sidewalk. So I did what little I could. I gave them my mat and my sleeping bag. But it really made me aware that sleeping on the streets of our city is very rough. And there are women who live that life, unfortunately. So that was one of my motivators. We worked as a team and we began to do research, learn the history of the site and also information about permanent supportive housing so we could create effective talking points, which we posted on our blog. We had articles and letters published in the newspapers. We met with elected officials, learned who was supportive and who wasn't. We prepared to speak before the City Council and the EdTech, Economic Development Technology Committee. Now the chair of that committee was strongly opposed to having affordable housing on this site. He wanted a commercial development. Because we knew that the chair of Ed Tech opposed us and other members did not, we had 47 supporters show up at an Ed Tech meeting. We were so persuasive, maybe we're like the widow in that parable. We were so insistent and relentless that the chair of Ed Tech eventually joined in a unanimous decision recommending supportive housing on this site. Then in December 2018, over 60 supporters packed the city council chambers and no one opposed us. The council not only unanimously voted for supportive housing at Heritage Square South, the mayor surprised everyone by recommending that the vacant city-owned YWCA next to City Hall be used to house those experiencing homelessness. This was a Holy Spirit moment and the beginning of a new campaign. What we learned from this was really important. When you speak truth to power with compassion, commitment, and careful research, good leaders listen. Our leaders have listened. During the past 2 years, we've not only had this victory at Heritage Square South, we also have had 65 units of supportive housing for homeless people at Salvation Army Hope Center. And we convinced the city council to agree to affordable and supportive housing at this city-owned property at the Civic Center, despite some initial opposition. And this project will be coming up in October, and we'll be doing our utmost to mobilize people. And today we just went through the process of listening to some absolutely wonderful affordable housing proposals that are now being presented and will be considered. And one of them is right above me. It's a proposal for 94 units of affordable housing, 10 to 30% for those experiencing homelessness. And it's really a thrill to me to see the artist rendering of something which a year ago was just a dream and a prayer on the part of our committee. So I could talk a lot about a lot of other projects we're doing around homeless housing, permanent supportive housing, converting motels to permanent supportive housing. This inclusionary zoning that I mentioned before means developers have to set aside a percentage of their units as affordable. We've convinced Pasadena to make that 20% set aside. And this policy has produced over 579 units of affordable housing at no cost to the city. And then we have a committee on the Community Land Trust. You heard a report about that, and the accessory dwelling units, and also safe parking. And you've heard reports about all of these. So we have a very vital teams working on various projects. And if you go to our website, you'll see that over the last 20 years, we've had a lot of successes, including our housing department, which wouldn't have existed without the advocates calling for it. So an important element of this work, as was pointed out by Alexia, is spiritual. We're not just trying to win victories. We're trying to change hearts and minds. So we try to connect spiritually and emotionally with elected officials. And we also try to connect with those who oppose us or are on the fence. We try to find higher ground and as well as common ground. And as been mentioned a few times, we try to build a beloved community. We work on relationships, not just winning approvals. And the biblical basis for our work we see as Jubilee or Sabbath economics, and you can go onto our website and learn more about that. It's also discussed in Jill's book. The spiritual basis for our work is really simple. It's the golden rule. We want for others what we ourselves have. You know, we have a home, Jill and I. We want everyone to have a home. We want everyone to be decently housed. And however, some people don't get it yet. So we seek to educate people who don't understand or fearful of affordable supportive housing. And I want to lift up Sonia. She was on a neighborhood listserv called Nextdoor, and people were saying terrible things about their homeless neighbors. And Sonia told us that she wanted to have an educational forum, and we worked together and brought people like Sean Morrissey, who also, like Cynthia, was homeless for many years, and now he works for Union Station. And these people who had lived experience with homelessness shared their stories, and I'm sure changed hearts and minds. So that's what we do. We educate others, and in the process, we also educate ourselves. These monthly forums are an extremely important part of our educational work. So I want to just conclude by giving some nuts and bolts about how to be effective in advocating for affordable housing. I think the first thing is that we need to take seriously these talking points, which we're glad to share with you. And everyone who advocates needs to stay on message. You need to be able to translate these talking points in your own voice, your own words, but basically stay on message. So an effective letter to the elected official identifies who you are, thanks the city council or city council member for something they've done you appreciate, and then makes an ask, a specific request regarding an ordinance or legislation that's on the agenda. A good example of what not to say is, if you don't fix this problem as soon as possible, you'll be a failure as a mayor. Better to say, we appreciate your prompt attention to this matter. Thank you for your service to our community. So here's a sample letter that I wrote a while back. The first sentence, identify who I am, my role in the community as a homeowner. I say something flattering about our city. City council members always like that, and I truly believe we live in a beautiful city. And then I go on to say what I'm concerned about. Renters are at risk of being evicted. I thank the city council for a eviction moratorium that they have already passed, because it was a good start. And then in the rest of my letter, I say we need to strengthen this ordinance, and I make some recommendations on how to do that. So that's a model letter. And that's a formula that usually works pretty well. Letters will be read to, well, first of all, if you send a letter to your elected official, generally they'll read it. It'll go into the public record if you send it to the to this website that I'm gonna, by the way, I'm gonna send you this PowerPoint in a PDF format, so all of you will have access to this. Because I know there's a lot of information here, more than you can absorb, I'm sure, just by listening. So here is the contact information for all your elected officials.
If you live in Pasadena.
If you live in Pasadena, I know some of you are coming from places quite distant, but the same principles apply. We live in a democracy. Elected officials are, I think of them as our employees. We elect them, we pay their salary. And generally speaking, they want to hear from us. We're their constituents. We help them get elected. So most cities now are not meeting the way they used to, face-to-face. So they're meeting by Zoom online. And you can send public comments via email, and they'll be read out loud in Pasadena if they're 200 words long. And finally, the other way to advocate that's important is to write a letter to a local newspaper. And the first thing that you need to do is find an article that's relevant to whatever your concern is, because the newspaper will not publish your letter unless it relates to something that they've already published. In this case, I wanted to write about motel conversions. And so I found an article that related to that, and I wrote a response, and it was published. So give facts as well as your feelings. And it's a good idea to reference a city council if you want their attention. If you mention a city council member in your letter or the city council, it's likely that one of their field representatives or the city council member themselves will read it, hear about it, and take it seriously. There's a 150 word count for many newspapers, some a little more, some a little less. You could also write a guest opinion. They're about 800 words. It's harder to get a guest opinion written. Jill has gotten a guest opinion written. Sonia has gotten a guest opinion written. And so has Rick Cole, who's another member of our team. But he used to be the mayor of Pasadena, so it was probably a lot easier for him than for a lot of other people. But generally speaking, they're open to a well-written op-ed piece, especially in Pasadena now. So I'm going to conclude by just saying some of the priorities for MHCH. You've heard about changing zoning so churches can build affordable housing on their land. And as Jill mentioned, there's going to be presentations on Saturday mornings at 10, and there's contact information and a link in Zoom in the chat. Anne Marie talked about the ADUs and how the city's encouraging them to be built for Section 8 and low-income renters. By the way, that picture with those masked people, that's Anne Marie and Len Tang. Pastor Len Tang. And they went out handing out information about this city program on a street called Zanja.
And it should be Anne Marie.
And finally, I'm involved with a campaign, as I mentioned, to urge the city council to build affordable housing at the Civic Center. So if you want to find out more, contact me. And I think Anne Marie gave her contact information if you're interested in ADUs. And here's some more contact information, my email, our blog, our website, and also our donation page. We can't do this work without funds. So I'm open to questions. I look forward to hearing what you're concerned about.
Thank you, Anthony. And so get your questions in now. And while we're waiting for people to put their questions in the chat, I have a question for you, Anthony, and that is, do you reach out to organizations that historically, or, you know, the NIMBYs, the Not in My Backyard, or the preservationists? Is there any benefit to doing that?
Well, we have done that. You know, with the Civic Center site, there were many interests. I mean, that site is so critically important to our city that, you know, there are people in the Pasadena Heritage who wanted to see certain things done to preserve its historic character. There were others who wanted other things done. So we met with the different stakeholders. In fact, Jill was quite surprised when I had people from Pasadena Heritage come to our home. They're not our usual allies, but in this case, we need to work together because the Civic Center is a center of our city, and we want to have a project there that everyone can be proud of and feel good about. So the answer to your question is, Sonia, we'll work with anybody and everybody. We are really interested in what's good for the city. And even if people disagree with some of our ideas, we want to be able to have a dialogue with them.
And I have another question. If somebody wants to, they don't know where they want to get involved, they would like to be a part of this advocacy, how do they get involved in making housing and community happen? You mentioned the talking points. So how would they reach out to find out what projects are going, what our priorities are and how they can help?
Okay, well, we'll be posting on our blog what our information about our campaigns, and we also send out periodic mailings. And if you want to get on our email list, just contact me. You know, we'd be glad to hear from you. And we often send these, by the way, the way the city council works is Thursday night, they post their agenda, and then they have this item come up on Monday. So usually we have to scramble to get people to write letters between Friday and Monday so that it'll be, so the council will be able to receive it. So if you want to be part of a campaign, just let me know and we'll put you on our mailing list. And by the way, if you want to be more involved, I'd be happy to talk with you on the phone and get to know you and see what gifts you have, what interests you have, and we'll work with you and get you involved. We've got an amazing team, and people with different talents and gifts are what make it happen.
Wonderful. I'm going to see if there's any additional questions. There were a couple of comments and questions about particular candidates. And as we all know that we have a mayoral runoff in November. Making Housing and Community Happen is a 501c3 organization, and there's this very strict prohibition against what's called electioneering or being for one candidate over another because of the tax exemption. They don't want that being used for political purposes. I know this because I used to regulate charities as an attorney, but I really, really strongly encourage you to go to Pasadena Now or Pasadena Star News. And it's a very important election. And I've learned in Pasadena since my retirement that you can make a difference here, and that we only have 7 council members and a mayor. And it's really important that you make them accountable for the issues that are important to you. And for us in our organization, it's housing and supportive housing. So you are always free to reach out to the candidate yourself and find out how they feel about affordable and supportive housing, what they believe the vision is for our city in taking care of our homeless. So I really encourage you to do that because we really need to have people on our council that are going to support affordable and supportive housing. Does anybody?
I wanted to add one thing to what Sonia said. She's absolutely right. We are totally nonpartisan. However, we had a candidates forum in January on affordable housing, and almost all the candidates, I think 13 candidates, showed up at the Quaker Meeting House, and they all answered in writing questions about their positions on various affordable housing concerns. So if you're interested in what they said back in January, you can go to makinghousinghhappen.net. You can search for Candidates Forum, and there's a PDF file with the statements of all of the candidates with regards to affordable housing. So yeah, and we wanted it in writing so we could hold them accountable when they got elected.
And that's really key there, because candidates can say a lot, but once they get elected, you have to hold them accountable. And so we do have a wonderful resource that Anthony just mentioned about their views on affordable and supportive housing. Do we have any additional questions, Bert? I think Anne-Marie wanted to say something.
Oh yeah, why don't you make that? Oh, okay.
I wanted to just add to that. You know, we are not going to say one candidate over the other, but what I've been doing is I've been on Nextdoor asking people, who are you voting for, and tell me why. And can you give me exact reasons why you're voting for this person? Because I can say I love puppies and rainbows and kittens, but what have I actually done for the puppy and rainbow and kitten community? What are the things that I've done in the past, and what can I show that I'm doing in the future? So I would say, look to the newspapers, look to previous city council meetings, and ask for real examples of change. And I think that should be for everything. There's propositions that I feel strongly about that my church is for. And so I went with an open heart and asked them if they would just listen to my point of view and explain to me why you feel this way. Because we do need to reach out to people that we disagree with so we can better understand with the proper solution. But I do want to just say one more time, because I saw in the chat somebody said, well, you know, this person said they were. That's great. Explain to me what that looks like. Give me facts. I love facts. I love truth. I love reality. So I would just encourage everybody, if you're passionate about something, ask. Not just do you support housing homeless people, but how do you support housing homeless people? And I think that's a really important question. And thank you all for being on here with us. We so appreciate your time.
There's a housing justice forum for next month. that will be on the propositions, so we can talk about that and have a position. And so stay tuned for next month. I think that'll be very helpful. And there's one issue that in particular, if you do address your city council persons, you might ask them how they feel about the concepts of overconcentration and distribution of housing throughout the city, including the parts most in need in Northwest. So that might get at the heart of some of the issues that will help you see where they stand. So.
Yeah, and just to follow up on the propositions, if you're interested in a faith perspective, the California Council of Churches issues its position on various propositions, and I think that's a good place to start to do a little, to look at it from, you know, an ethical and moral perspective.
We'll go more in depth.
But we'll be discussing it with our group in the next Housing Justice Forum.
Anthony, can I just add that I actually spoke to them today, and they said that the only propositions that they are taking into consideration is 14 and 16, which are not the housing propositions.
Yeah, that's why. Stay tuned. You know, we'll be going into more depth next month.
Yeah, we'll be looking at it from a housing justice perspective of these propositions. Yeah.
Do we have any additional questions before we close it out? And then
I have a question.
That,
Hi, this is Jennifer Lim. I have a question. I attended a webinar with Pax Christi on Saturday, and we heard from someone with an interfaith housing group, and they said to use somehow the term homeless might be stigmatizing, as they suggested the use of unsheltered. And I was also thinking, like, people experience housing insecurity in different ways. They might, if you say homeless, they might think, okay, they're living on Skid Row, or they're sleeping on the sidewalk. You could have a family that's borrowing the living room couches of a friend, and they're experiencing housing insecurity. And then do you include those people in the population that you're serving? Because when you say homeless, I'm thinking, okay, you know, people sleeping on the sidewalk. That's the popular. But if you say housing insecurity and unsheltered, then we're going to think maybe more than that, people sleeping in cars, because it's not, I mean, it's not uncommon. Someone may be getting divorced, and there may be some kind of issue over the housing, and only one person lives in there. She decided not to contest, and then they end up living in a house. But, you know, I don't know if I want to call this person homeless to her face. I mean, her children might not like it. And then if we're going to be offering help, could we not say like unsheltered, or maybe housing insecurity, and then we could be serving like a larger group? Just a question.
That's a really good point. And I try to avoid referring to the homeless, you know, our homeless neighbors or people experiencing homelessness. And even then, we need to qualify that a little bit, because there are many people who are living on the streets or living with housing insecurity in Pasadena who've lived here for 20 or plus years. That's what we discovered when we did a survey, you know, for the homeless count. These are not people who are homeless. Their home is Pasadena. They just don't have a shelter, or they don't have a roof over their head. So I really take your point to heart. We try to avoid using terminology like the homeless, and really focus on phrases like unsheltered or unhoused. But it's a very good point. And then there's the other point, which is there are a lot of children and families who technically are not living on the street, but they're doubled or tripled up in an apartment. They don't really have a secure place, as you say, housing insecure. And there are government programs to help those children. And there are hundreds of them who are experiencing housing insecurity. And this government program tries to address some of their special needs when they go to school, so that they will thrive. So I appreciate your comments, Jennifer.
Jennifer, there's a
Thank you
lot
for
of
your efforts. Yeah.
there's a lot of different definitions
Yeah.
Of homelessness, and some are very technical. In order to qualify for certain types of housing, if it's permanent supportive, it's very clearly defined. And if you're in the school district and you're considered homeless, it's another total different definition. So different pots of money define it differently, but I so appreciate what you're saying, because no one wants to be called homeless. It's not a good label. And so we've got to make sure everyone feels included and not alienated by labels. But there's got to be some way to talk about how do we target a particular group and make sure they get housed. And so we need to be sensitive culturally and make sure we're really wise as serpents and gentle as doves. So yeah, thanks. Did you want to say if people wanted to hang out afterwards and talk?
Yeah, as you heard, we're in a really exciting moment with the Civic Center. It's been quite a campaign over the last year to get city council members to move away from the model of we want commercial development to we want mixed use. We want commercial development and affordable housing. So we're not at the finish line yet. There's still going to be council meetings, and probably more than one, to discuss the various proposals that were presented today. But if anyone's interested in this campaign, stick around, because I think it really gets at the heart of our city. The Civic Center has not really completely developed. It's been left kind of incomplete, but it was intended to be the kind of the moral and spiritual heart of our city. And we have an opportunity to make it something really, really special, something that we can be proud of and that other cities we want to emulate. So if you want to stick around, talk about the Civic Center, I'd be happy to hear you and share with you.
Yeah, I live near there, and we haven't had any problems from the people living at the what do you call it, the something mall, the
Centennial Place.
Yeah, and yeah. I see them, and they're, you know, they're treated right, and they have shelter, and you know, and 94 units is not a lot. It's not going to be congested.
Right.
Okay,
and
so for those who would like to stay, that's great. I want to just thank everyone for coming, and thank you in advance for any and all advocacy you engage in to support affordable, supportive housing locally and beyond. A special thank you to Reverend Dr. Alexia and to Dr. Anthony for giving us such inspiration and practical information tonight to help us become better advocates, faith-rooted advocates. We encourage you all to check out Making Housing and Community Happens website and find out ways you can support our organization through volunteering or with monetary donations. So I'm going to say good night, and for those who want to stick around, hope to see you next month. It's going to be great.
Yes, thank you. Have to go.
Great job, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia,
for coordinating all this.